And a lot of people just assume that wine will always be around, but in reality, we're using valuable agricultural land, we're using water,
Yeah.
and it may be that in 2050, with another 2 billion people on the planet and, climate change and everything else, that there isn't a place for wine.
So I've just had a fantastic chat with the wonderful Louisa Rose of Yalumba, and now we've got a little tasting in the wine store where we're looking through all of the rare and fine, so all of their top wines. Think Signature, Vigilius, Octavius, Menzies, and of course the Kaylee. It's a fantastic tasting. Hi Louisa, how are you?
Damien, how are you going?
Good, thank you. It's been a while. It's been all of 2 weeks.
All of 2 weeks. How
since
great.
I've seen you. Lucky to spend that very amazing night down in Sydney celebrating the new release of the Signature.
Yes, Signature and our other rare and fine wines. It was a great night, hey?
It was a very, very, very good night. And so you're here today, so I thought I'd pull you aside and ask you a few questions, if that's all right.
Absolutely, you can.
So you've been at Yalumba, I'm not going to say how many years, but you've been there for quite some time. What's kept you there so long? Why? I find that in this day and age, there's a lot of people that like to move around and do different things, but like you've stayed the company, and I feel like you've had a very good run at it. So what's kept you there?
Look, it's a really good question because I've literally never worked anywhere else apart from with my family on our family vineyard in the Yarra Valley as I was growing up. I got a job at Yalumba while I was still studying in South Australia to learn how to make wine and grow grapes, and I've literally been there ever since. But I will tell you some of the things I think is really important about the Hillsmith family, because of course Yalumba family owned, 177 years later this year, oldest family owned winery in Australia. And working for a family that makes decisions for the next generation, the generation after that, is you buy into that.
Yeah.
It's not decisions about, what's the most important thing for today and tomorrow and the end of the financial year. And I won't say they're not important. Of course they are, because, there's no point in being around if you go broke. But the big decisions that really matter, the Hillsmith family make them, and they make those, and they always have. And not only that, but those of us that work there, and there's many of us that have worked there for a long, long time, we feel like we're playing a part in it and that we matter.
Yeah.
And that's important, I think, for working for someone too.
100%. Yeah.
I don't think it's just because I'm really lazy and I've never looked for another job.
No, and I think that's probably why I wanted to ask, because I sort of feel like that the Hillsmith family in general, and I know because obviously my father worked for the company for over 25 years themselves, and I think that their culture and their ability to keep amazing people close to them is something to celebrate.
Yeah. If that people listen, sometimes the answer is no.
Yeah.
But, you're always listened to.
Yeah.
And it's also been, and your dad, I mean, I worked with him as well as having worked with you. We went through a really cool time in the wine industry.
Yeah.
So from the early 90s, through, those couple of decades, Australian wine went around the world. We set the world on fire. We created styles. We made other regions around the world pick up their game and make better wines. And it was a really exciting time.
Yeah.
And so, it's been pretty good. It has been a good run.
Yeah, very cool. And that leads me into where I'm sort of going to next. Obviously, I feel like you'll never leave the winemaking side. I feel like you'll always have a big role to play there, but you're taking on a bit of a sustainability role.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a couple of parts to this question, but so what does that sort of look like for you now, and doing that role versus just the winemaking side of it?
Yeah. Look, I don't think it was ever just the winemaking, because winemaking is one of those roles which is literally, one day you could be in a vineyard or even in a paddock that's going to one day become a vineyard, and the next day you might be in one of the great restaurants in the world talking to people, that are buying, the great wines of the world, eating some of the most amazing food. Or I might be here in Maroochydore.
Yeah.
So winemakers have always got this really broad remit, really, in sort of a value-added industry. And one of the things that became more and more and more important as I was going through that, in winemaking, as my title, was sustainability. And we didn't talk about it as sustainability for a long time. It was just, again, doing the right things, looking after biodiversity, protecting remnant vegetation, revegetating blank areas of land, introducing wild yeast into our winemaking and those sort of things, which ultimately now we talk about under our sustainability umbrella. But ultimately it was, certainly the environmental side of sustainability was all about doing the right things for the environment, leaving your land in a better place for the next generation. I talk about now when I, start my sustainability talks is, there's something inherently sustainable about a sixth generation family, 177 years, that have been through the ups and downs. They've been through, various depressions and recessions and pandemics and, world wars, and they've all, every generation's had their own challenges, and yet somehow or other, six generations later, they're still there in the same place, in a winery named with an Aboriginal word from the Paramount people meaning all the country around. That Samuel Smith, somehow this brewer from Dorset, came out to what is now the Eden Valley and, connected enough with the local people to have that sort of connection to the country, and still there. It literally is still there, even stronger 6 generations.
Yeah, thriving. Yeah, exactly right. And so the word sustainability gets thrown around a lot. There's a lot of companies that try and sort of hold on to it. And I know, like, I worked with Yalumba and you in the early 2010s, and I feel like sustainability definitely was something we were talking about back then. But I think from being inside the industry, to those people that are outside the industry, what makes Yalumba stand out? And I think Yalumba have done a fantastic job to really be ahead of the game when it comes to sustainability. So, what are the key things that I suppose that you're doing from that point of view?
Well, I think the key thing, there's a lot of key things. So, looking after the land, promoting biodiversity in our vineyards, that's decades long, and that's been a really important part of it. For every hectare of vineyard that we own, we have just over a hectare of native vegetation within and around our vineyards that we are either protecting because it's old growth or remnant, or we've revegetated to increase the biodiversity, right? And that brings in all the furries and the feathers and the creepies and the crawlies and all those things that you need to balance nature out.
And it also helps in the vineyard too, doesn't it?
So much so, because, you've got, every time, if a light brown apple moth comes in and lays its eggs and they turn into caterpillars, instead of us needing to go and spray a chemical to kill them, there's so many birds and spiders and wasps that'll go in and sort of compete to eat them or to put them into suspended animation or whatever they do. It's incredible. And so nature starts to look after itself. But from a winemaking point of view, I think the ultimate in that is that because we're using so many less chemicals, we have this beautiful population of really healthy natural yeast and bacteria in our vineyards, and they piggyback in on the grapes, they wash off into our juices, we let them do the fermentation for us, and they make the wine for us. And I mean, how much more of place can you get than the native, microflora population that's making your wines?
And I feel like that's definitely something you've been doing for a long time. Do you feel that there was a natural move away from inoculating with packet yeast, for lack of a better word, to really going, all right, we want to do wild ferments?
Yes, but it wasn't that simple. I mean, it was. I mean, when I started in 1992, I mean, nobody was using wild yeast. I mean, there might have been one crazy sort of winemaker that was doing a barrel somewhere. The fact that we started to do it was because we were trying to grapple with and work out how on earth to make this variety that we planted in 1980 called Viognier that was so different, so different from anything else that we'd ever seen. And it was, we said, well, let's just give this a go and do a couple of barrels, in the early 90s and say, is this going to work? And what came out of it was just this most beautiful wine, so much more integrated, so much more complex, so, ultimately turned out to have so much better longevity and freshness that, we loved it in Viognier. It became really obvious early on that was going to be the case, and then we just spread it out through the rest of our wine portfolio. And it's just a natural part of what we do now. And, on small scale, but also on the larger scale and the more commercial sort of end. So it's been a great thing. It sounds easy now, but at the time, I'm probably lucky I wasn't sacked, to be honest, in the first couple of years. But we started small.
Absolutely. You got to start somewhere, don't you?
But just going back on the sustainability thing, so there's a couple of other things. So in the more recent times, Sustainable Wine Growing Australia, which is our national sustainability program, which is a third-party audited system under a whole lot of standards that come under the fresh care things, is now something that vineyards and wineries can become certified with. All of our wines, starting in 2021 with our estate vineyards and then creeping in over the next couple of years with all of our growers as well. They're now all got that little logo on the back label, and that's a really exciting continuous improvement program that works right across all sorts of areas of sustainability within vineyards and wineries. So if people see that on a label, that's a really good cue that you've got a winery that's working sustainably, and that will continue to get better and better as new ideas and best practice, new best practices come about.
Yeah.
But the other thing we're doing, which is a bit unusual, is that we're members of the International Wineries for Climate Action. And that is a group of wineries from 15 countries. It covers about 175 wineries now over 3.5% of global wine production. It was started in 2019 by Torres family in Spain and Jackson family in California, and it's got a pretty single focus about decarbonisation. So you join that, you commit to the United Nations Race to Zero program, which is to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, and then net zero by 2050. And we are well on the way to 50%. We're at the end of last financial year, we've got 41% reductions from our baseline year.
Wow.
Across scope 1, 2 and 3. We won't go into that now because your podcast will run way over.
Yeah.
But that includes the supply chain, right? So it's not just what we do in our electricity.
So it's glass,
it's transports, all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so we continue to work on that and different new programs. We've got a transition plan or a roadmap to get to 2050 and then beyond that. So that's a really exciting thing. There's only 3 members of that in Australia at the moment. There's Henschke and Yalumba, which are gold members, and Voyager Estate over in Western Australia.
Wow.
But it's a great collection of people. And the point of this group to get together is actually to work together to learn from each other, to encourage each other and do things together so that because it's hard work on your own. Even just measuring, much less actually reducing, is a lot of work. And so being part of this collective has just been incredible.
Yeah, wow. And so do you feel that was something done from like a Europe-based thing? Because I know European unions were quite a big...
So it was Europe and America.
Interestingly,
America with all the stuff that's happening today, and maybe we shouldn't go there. But I mean, I think there's a lot of Europeans, but there's quite a lot of New Zealanders, Canadians, right across the world. So I think it's something that's becoming more and more important. And one of the things I think, for us has always been the case is that we've often been leaders in that area.
Yeah.
And are we going to change the world on our own? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But you've got to have leaders that inspire others and bring other people along.
Yeah.
And that's what often people don't understand about how well the wine industry works together for common goals. We might be competitors out there on the shelf, but we all know that if we work together and raise a bar, that we're all going to do better ultimately. And in reality, that if we don't really work hard, there may be no place for wine in this 2050 year that we're all talking about.
Well, go back to what we spoke about right at the beginning, right? You're with a company that's already thinking about 30, 40, 50 years in advance. And there's a lot of companies that are thinking about next week or next month, so... And
a lot of people just assume that wine will always be around. But in reality, we're using valuable agricultural land. We're using water.
Yeah.
And it may be that in 2050, with another 2 billion people on the planet and, climate change and everything else, that there isn't a place for wine. So if there's going to be one, we've got to absolutely earn it. We've got to lead the wine industry. But wine industry has to lead other agricultural industries as well.
Well, that sort of leads into where I was going to next with the question of with the current state, we talk about there's a bit of a wine glut at the moment. There's lots of things going on in the industry. And for those on the outside probably don't know it as much as for us on the inside, with lots of movement within different things and big companies making big losses. Are you confident that we can still be here in 50 years' time? And from, I know that there would be a lot of very upset, angry people, I think, if there wasn't. But I from my point of view, I sort of see it as a slightly invigorating time to be there, because people are drinking less, but they're drinking better. And I think the companies like Yalumba that really focus on quality over quantity, I think there's always hopefully going to be a space for us.
Well, I hope so, but we don't take that for granted, and we know we have to work for that. I mean, you're right. The world is absolutely an oversupply. There's far more wine. There's more grapes than to make wine in than the world is drinking.
Yeah.
And I think I'm right in saying that last year, the world drank. It hasn't drunk less wine than it since 1961. Right. So there is an issue there. But there's still a lot of people when I say flippantly, wine's a luxury product and we don't need it, that sort of go, no, that's not absolutely right. But no, we have to earn that place. We absolutely have to earn that place. And the whole global wine industry needs to readjust in terms of its volume. It's not all, you're right, it's not about volume anymore. It's about experiences. It's about creating wines that help people create memories. It's not just about, being a commodity, because there's a lot of other commodities that are out there.
Yeah.
And it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for everybody, and nobody escapes that. And there will be businesses that, that probably don't survive. But, I think if anyone's going to a family-owned winery that's used to you know, tightening its
ups and
laces
downs
and moving
yeah.
onwards is, you know, is likely to get there.
Yeah. I feel like I could talk to you a lot about that, but let's wrap it up. I want to ask, I think one of my, what I think I'd like to ask a lot of people, you've been in the Barossa a long time. You've worked for this beautiful company for a long time. What do you drink when it's not the Barossa, it's not Yalumba? I know it's a hard question because if I get asked that question, it's a tough one. But is there anything that you've drunk recently, or is there anything that's blown your socks off that you've gone, wow?
Um, Look, I try to drink widely.
Yeah.
I don't always succeed, I have to say. Um, you know, I love Viognier, but I'm also a great Riesling lover. And I
Yes.
love the Rieslings from around the world. I think Riesling is one of those varieties that absolutely mirrors where it comes from, because from a winemaking point of view, you don't do much. If you muck it up when you pick those grapes, there's not much left. There's nowhere else to hide. And, you know, Riesling's one of those wines where I try to talk to people about how important balance is. You know, it's not about I like sweet Rieslings or I like dry Rieslings. It's actually about I love Rieslings that have got balance.
Yeah.
You know, and the great Rieslings of the world, some of them are super sweet, but they've got searing acidities, and together they balance out so beautifully that they're just a really harmonious drink, and that's what I love. So, you know, if you judge me on how much of a particular variety or something I drink, it would be Riesling.
Riesling.
You
Yeah.
know, Alsace, Germany, New Zealand, Clare, Eden.
Yeah.
I know you said not Barossa, but
Oh,
Eden
that's
Valley is one of
okay.
the great Riesling vineyards of the world.
100%.
So yeah, but look, you know, I know you didn't ask me this question, but a lot of people would ask me, well, what's your desert island wine? Or if you could only drink
Yeah.
one wine, what would it be? And my answer to that is what a terrible situation that would be if that was your life.
Yes.
The beautiful thing about wine is that you could have a different wine every day of your life, and you'd never run out of wines to try.
Exactly.
And that
right.
is the beauty of what the
Yeah.
wine industry is about.
100%. I feel like if somebody asked me that the other week, I would have said that Tricentenary Grenache that
Yeah,
we
that's
had the
pretty
other
cool
night.
too. I do
love
drink a
that
lot
one.
of Grenache actually,
Yeah,
because that is so delicious. But you're just not far out of the Barossa, that one.
No, exactly right. Exactly right. But no, thank you so much for taking a couple of minutes to have a chat with us. I
Always a
appreciate it.
pleasure. Thank you, Damien. Great
Thank
to see
you. Cheers. So we're constantly doing wine tastings in store all the time, every weekend, in fact, both wine store here in Bocarina. So make sure you come on down. Always got it written up on our little chalkboards of what we've got happening next. And when we get these special occasions where we have one of the best winemakers in the country available, we grab them, bring them in, and so you can try their fantastic wines. Not just on the chalkboard, check out our social media or even our website.